All right, so we got this little toy here. This is the Ronin RS2. This is a electric gimbal made by DJI. I'm a fan of DJI. This is not sponsored, so let's talk about it. Gimbals. This is the very first gimbal that I ever used. This thing has weights on it, and ow, it didn't work. It didn't work for me. Didn't like it, but I decided to upgrade. Now, this is a gimbal I used for a hot second. It was similar to this one, but a little bit better quality. Haha, there she is. So it did come with its little carrying case. This red little gimbal that I got, that I just showed, is actually from a friend. He was selling it for like 20 bucks, so I bought it. And I did use it for a while and then realized that it wasn't very good. So it didn't work for me. But then I started using this little thing. Now this is more like something that you might see on Devin Supertramp's videos. He has a gimbal similar to this. He has his own line of gimbals, which I think are actually really cool. I don't own one because I feel that these gimbals with the weights on the bottom they can work, and you can get a very natural movement with these because they're not electric, but even then, the problem about these is literally anything you do to the camera, whether you're adding a microphone, even a cord, or whatever it is you're doing to the camera, you have to rebalance these. Now, I will say this now, on the Ronins, you do have to do the same thing, but they made it so much easier to do. This thing, it's difficult to use, although it's fun to spin. Look at that. It's like a UFO. It's more of a toy now, but anyway, so I've gone from non-electric to electric. Did I mention it's hard to put back in the case? So what is the purpose of a gimbal? To make your shots smooth. Because, believe it or not, when we use our hands for camera work, when we are recording things, we are not very still. Especially when we're using higher focal lengths like 50 millimeters or higher, 85, anything high. Sometimes even wide shots like 24 millimeters can still be shaky when we're using our hands. Now, in some cases, shaky movement in the camera is acceptable depending on the context of your video. Sometimes shaky movement is something that is actually encouraged for very specific things like action scenes, because it adds to the feeling, it adds to the movement, it adds speed. So the viewer is more like immersed into the movie because there's a lot of shake. Now that is completely acceptable in certain cases. For wedding videos, for example, shaky movement is something you really should avoid. How do you eliminate shake in your camera? Well, there are two items you can use. One is a gimbal and two is a tripod. Now a tripod, we all know what a tripod is, I would hope. Tripods are three-legged things. Funny note, the tripod I'm using right now, the name of this tripod is called Three-Legged Thing, which I think is super funny, and it's kind of why I bought it. But tripods are sedentary, they do not move, and that's why the camera is not moving right now, because it's set on a place where it's not going to move. A gimbal is different. A gimbal makes your shot smooth and allows the camera to be mobile while still being smooth. Being still, if that makes sense. Probably doesn't make sense. You got what I'm trying to say though. So when we're talking about gimbals, I have gone from the little red one to the little blue one that have both worked with weights, and you have to balance it using the 2-second rule. Basically, you put the camera on the end, you use weights, and basically you hold it horizontally and you let go, and if it takes 5 seconds to go from horizontal to vertical, then you balanced it right, and then you just make sure the tilt is correct. But it's just a big pain to do it like that. Now, I mentioned Devin Supertramp, Devin Graham's line of gimbals. he has designed it in a way where you can turn the dials and you will actually change the balance very easily like that. Now, I think that's a great way to use one of those kind of gimbals. I think every single gimbal should be designed like that. Shout out to Devin Graham for being super smart. And that's great. Now, I personally will not use one of those kind of gimbals just because weights, it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. We have here the DJI Ronin RS2. Now, they do have multiple kinds. This is the RS2. There is an RS, the RS1. They also have the RCs, I believe. Is that what the names are? They're the newer kind of gimbals like this, but they're the budget ones. Now, this is actually the Pro version, and the only difference between the RS2 and the RS2 Pro Pack, is that what mine says? Yes. They come with a little case. Mine says Pro on it. And the only difference is an additional $200 and the Raven Eye. Now, the Raven Eye is just a wireless transmitter that connects to your cell phone through the DJI Ronin app. Now, one of the cool things you can do with this Ronin app is, one, you can plug it into pretty much any camera, and DJI has included every single cord you probably will ever need to connect to any single camera that you use. Now, the transmitter sends the display from your camera to your phone, which is actually what I'm using right now to see myself in a little monitor. Because if you remember in the last video about cameras, the 5D Mark IV does not have a swivel screen. Therefore, I can't see myself on a display. So I've had to use the DJI Raven Eye just so I can see myself on a monitor to make sure things are actually working. Hello. So you might have noticed while I'm moving this around, the camera has been very steady. So as I'm moving this camera around, you'll notice it's very stationary. It doesn't really change angle or anything. That's because this thing has multiple motors. Now we have the motor right here. We have a motor right here at the bottom. And then you have a motor right here. Now, those are the three motors that allow the camera to be incredibly smooth. And the great thing is because it's electric, it's really smart. You can't do movements like this on a gimbal with weights on it, just because it just doesn't work that way. One of the cool things about the RS2 is when you first start it up, after you balance everything, it automatically balances the camera for you. Now, what you can do in addition is something called auto tune, where you basically turn on the auto tune function and it starts calibrating the weight and figuring out what the payload of the camera is, so you can get maximum performance out of your Ronin. Now, it does make a noise when you do the auto tune, and at first I thought it was broken. It's not. The Raven Eye does make a little bit of a noise as you're auto tuning, but it's kind of necessary. Now, one of the cool things about the Ronin as well is it has a display. On the other Ronin I've seen, the first Ronin does not have a screen, and for you to actually do things, you had to use the app. Now, you can still use the app for a ton of things, and I still have the app for those things. This is just really nice to have a little display, and you're able to flip around and do whatever it is you need to do. The RS2 is able to do multiple things. It can track, it can shoot panoramas, it can time-lapse. In addition, you can actually change how the camera moves. You can change the follow modes is what they're called. You have a 360 roll, which is kind of cool because the 360 will basically, you turn on 360 roll and the thing just spins in a 360 and it points the camera upwards. Now you have portrait mode, which does the same thing, but it turns it so it's more of a portrait style video. Now, I think this would be really good for like TikTok because they use the vertical video for everything, which is fine. But I personally will keep it on PF, which is the very first one. And basically what that does is it makes the camera stay exactly where it is in space. Now, the cool thing about the Ronin is there's also a joystick on it, which allows you to point the camera in whatever direction or angle you want. And then while still moving it, if I point it upward, for example, and I move it, it's going to stay there, which I think is really cool. Now, if you want it to go back to its original position, you just double click the front button, it goes back to its original spot. Another thing about the Ronins, they do have this little dial. Now, this dial can be changed to multiple things. This dial can be changed for ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. And I believe you can actually even use it for white balance as well. I personally keep it set on ISO. I'm very picky when it comes to having certain settings for filming, I will use 24 frames a second most of the time. I will use 24 frames a second and get proper motion blur, which is on a DSLR, a 50th of a second. And then I'd like to keep that aperture as wide as I possibly can for that lack of depth. So I usually will adjust with ISO. You don't have to do it that way. Probably shouldn't do it that way. I do it because it's most convenient for me and it's what I prefer. Now, another cool thing about the Ronin, if you get the Pro version, I mentioned the Raven Eye, which is a wireless transmitter. The Pro version of the Ronin also includes not only the Raven Eye, but a focus pulling mechanism as well. And that's basically for anybody who has a lens that doesn't have autofocus. So you're able to adjust your settings with the Raven Eye and with the RS2. Now you can also use the autofocus function on your cameras with the Ronin, just by using one of the buttons. You have the record button, which you can half press to focus, and then you hard press to start recording. Now, I don't have a lot of experience with Sony cameras and the Ronin. I strictly just have used Canon cameras for the Ronin. And the autofocus has been very helpful and being able to control it just from the back of the Ronin. So it's basically hands-free from the camera unless you want to change certain things, like again, your frame rate and other things like that. You have to do that on the camera, which is okay because the RS2 has integrated the second grip into also a tripod, which I absolutely love and keep casually putting it behind me because the Ronin will stand on its own. That's something I struggle with the other gimbals because they would fall over. And if they fell over, sometimes they would unbalance themselves, which is a big pain. Now, this additional grip does come off, and you can use this grip for something called briefcase mode. And the Ronins actually do come with an additional piece, which is right here actually. An additional piece that you just kind of slap on it, and then it will screw into that little thing. And then you can use briefcase mode, which basically allows you to hold the Ronin like this, and then you have a handle on top. So briefcase. Now, if we dive into the Ronin app actually does multiple things. If anyone has used the DJI Mavic apps for the drones, the interfaces are very similar, where you have to connect to the item, and then there are multiple functions that you can use to change up certain things. On the Ronin, you don't have to have the app to use it, but if you use the app, there are multiple things you can do, like have a second operator, which is something that I think is really, really cool to integrate in something like the Ronin, because you can have somebody, for example, run through whatever it may be, and then you can have a second operator who can control the Ronin and control where exactly the camera is pointing. So the one operator is just running or doing whatever he needs to do and trying not to fall on his face, while the other person is actually trying to get the shot. Now, there are two things you can do, which I think are really cool within the app, is you can use a joystick on the app, or you can use a gyroscope thing, kind of like if you played The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, there's the gyroscope things where you move your controller and it moves. Same concept. You can do it with your cell phone, which I think is super, super, super cool. And it's more of a toy. It's more of a thing that I like to play with. Never actually had to use it yet because I never have a second operator. But I do love having it. I love having the assurance that it is there for when I need it. And just a reminder, that is actually only available with the Raven Eye. I'm pretty sure it's just with the Raven Eye. If it's not though, please let me know, because I probably should know this. When it comes to charging the Ronin, it's actually very easy because the Ronin actually, the grip that you have is also the battery. Now you might have noticed there are these little lights. The lights indicate what power level the battery is at. So you can actually go online and you can purchase multiple battery grips and have more batteries for your Ronin. They are expensive. They are expensive. But when it comes to charging the Ronin, it's actually very easy. Just like every other DJI product, they charge with USB-C and most items in general nowadays. So for every single gimbal that people own, you should know how to balance it. Now, again, depending on your gimbal, it balances in multiple ways. So the first two gimbals that I showed, the ones with weights, you have to balance them with specific rules. For the Ronin, it's made very easy, and I'm gonna show you how to do it right now. Okay, so this is how you actually set these things up. Now, I have actually gone ahead and completely unbalanced it, so this is 100% how you should balance it. So right away, the Ronin does come with this little plate. This is the plate that you throw onto the Ronin itself. It locks in, and then it doesn't come out until you actually hit the release button. Pops right out. Now, it has that plate and it has a bunch of markings on it, so you're able to tell where exactly you need to push back and forward. It does come with a little dial, which is great, so you can just be very precise, which is great. Now what you do is you take the camera and you put on its little base plate that DJI gives you with it. Make sure you push it all the way. You want to push it all the way as far as you can to the right and then lock it in. Now that's perfect. Now what you're going to do, the Ronin actually comes with a bunch of different locks on it. So for every single axis, you have the turning left and right, you have the pivoting, and then on top of that, you have the tilt. So we're going to start right at the top. So how you actually do it is you're going to play around with this up and down motion right here. Now, the very first thing you want to do when you're actually balancing these things is you want to get the camera to point straight up and stay that way. Now, that is the first way you're going to balance it, and how you balance it that way is you have the little dial right here on the side. You'll just loosen that. I'm going to lock this so it stays in place while I do it. You just stick it up in the air, and oh shoot. Make sure everything's locked except for the one thing so nothing falls around. And you want it to stick straight up. So I will loosen it and I will push it forward and backwards to where I need it to be. So that's too much. We're gonna go backwards and go the other way again. And you want to be pretty on point with it. You can be very gentle when you push on it, but you want it to stick up straight in the air, just like, whoop. Just like that, more or less. Right. Okay, it's falling. So I've messed up a little bit, which is okay. It does take a little bit of practice, which is fine. I think I'm pushing it the wrong direction. That's okay. There we go. Now sticks up straight in the air, just like that. Now you push it forward and you want to be able to keep it pointing 45 degrees up and down, and it stays that way. That way you'll know it's balanced correctly. Now right now it's currently very front heavy. So what you do is you loosen this little dial, and then you can use this little dial to push it exactly where you need it to be. Be gentle with it. That way you'll know if you're doing it right, because it won't fall as much because you're not hitting the camera. And once you get it set, you should be able to tilt it up and down perfectly, and it should stay there. That first axis is done. Now you can lock it and it will stay. It won't go down. The very next axis that you will need to play around with, and I'm going to turn the whole thing on the side just like that, is the turning. Now how you balance this, there's another little piece right here. You just unlock that and you push it left and right. Now that was actually pretty good. So you want to push it and make sure it's pretty level with itself. It's not going to be heavier on one side. Now I have seen where people have balanced these that they are able to stay just like that and just like that. Mine don't do that, and I think that's just because the payload on my cameras are pretty light, especially this one. This is the T3i, by the way. But you set it, basically how I like to make sure it's actually in the right spot is I'll lock it, unlock it, and see if it tilts. If it doesn't, you're set. Now the very last thing is this top low area right up here. Now I fortunately haven't had a need to ever adjust that on my cameras, and that's just because I don't know. I actually really don't. But you have the little piece right here. You just loosen that. And how you can tell if this is balanced, because you wouldn't really have any idea if that's balanced or not because it's sitting the way it is. So how you actually know is you have to tilt it to the side and then spin it around. If it moves like so, you need to adjust it. So I need to adjust it. I believe I need to push it backwards. Tilt it to the side. If it doesn't move, just like that, turn it. Now it moved a little bit, so I think I need to push it just a little bit more, which is okay. Now I'm gonna lock it real quick. Now it's too much. Okay, so I need to push it back just a little bit. And it just takes a little bit of trial and error. I'm gonna tilt to this side again. You wanna tilt it onto its feet, the two little feet on the tripod, just at an angle. And then again, turn it. If it stays, turn it, stays, perfect, you are ready to go. So if you unlock everything, everything should be very floppy-like, I guess, floppy. And it should stay that way, more or less. So once you're done, you are okay to turn on the Ronin. Number one rule about the Ronin though, if you're gonna turn on, make sure everything is unlocked. Everything needs to be free, because what you can do is damage these motors. You don't wanna do that, because damaging motors is bad and you waste a lot of money. It's completely balanced. You turn it on and like magic, balanced perfectly. And now you are ready to shoot. Now, before you actually shoot, you should do something called auto tune. I mentioned that earlier. All you need to do is you can go into your setting and you can click the auto tune function, which I've shown, or there's a little way you can do it that's much faster. If you want to do it quickly, you have the M button and then you have the back trigger. You just hold those buttons for a little bit until it starts, and the camera will start shaking. Anyway, that's how you balance them. So that's it for the Ronin RS2. It's actually a really cool item, a piece of kit to have. You can get the Ronin for $800, but if you spend $1,000, you can get the Pro version, which will have multiple things added to it, which in my opinion are very helpful and good to have, especially if you end up going on a shoot or doing whatever it is you need to use the Ronin for. You'll have those multiple things that you can still use and have the assurance of actually having them. So that's it for the Ronin RS2. So hit that like button, subscribe, smash the bell icon, and you'll be notified for when I post another video. Stay creative, and I will see you guys in the next video.